Hey guys, this is Jared Flinn with the BulkLoads podcast. Welcome today. Again, I'm going to do this one solo today. I've had a lot of requests over the past few months of listeners actually saying, Jared, I love your podcast. What other trucking podcasts would you recommend? The truth of the matter is I don't listen to other trucking podcasts. I have listened to some and I don't agree with some of the aspects of it. And not all, but some of the other podcasts I listen to seem to be a little more vulgar. Some of these other podcasts I listen to, they talk about the problem, but no solutions. They almost get the audience more, I guess, fired up or more anxiety instead of actually creating solutions. If you've known me for a while, I'm one of those that always say, hey, I don't want to hear problems. I want to hear solutions. We're all here to make each other better. So today I'm going to give you the top 5 podcasts that I listen to. Most of these podcasts I've listened to probably over some of them almost 10 years or whenever they started. And I'm going to go through them today and tell you a little bit about why I listen to them. We're also going to put links to these podcasts. So I want to encourage you to check these podcasts out. A lot of these podcasts have helped me to be to where I am today by some of the actions that I've taken. So number one, and if you know me very well, you know that I preach and talk about this all the time, but my favorite podcast that I listen to is the Business Made Simple podcast hosted by Donald Miller. It used to be the Story brand, and I think that one still exists, but now they've kind of morphed into the Business Made Simple one. Donald Miller, he's a huge fan of mine. He's actually a Christian book writer by trade that turned into a business coach, marketing person. And Donald, I think this guy just nails it out of the park. His podcast, he brings on specific guests. And again, they talk about how to grow your business, different steps of the business, everything from marketing to finance. One thing I love about Donald Miller, and I've tried to incorporate this most, he practices what he preaches. The things that he tells people to do are things and steps that he takes. And sometimes Donald gets really in depth. He tells you exactly how much his company has made over the years and how they've made the money that they made. So he really, again, just brings a lot of great content to it. And again, he practices what he preaches, what he says, what he recommends are the actions that he's taking. So number one that I would recommend is the Business Made Simple podcast hosted by Donald Miller. Again, we'll put those links on there. My second favorite podcast, and I actually found out about Donald Miller through this podcast, was the EntreLeadership podcast. It's a podcast. It's through the Dave Ramsey company. And there's several different hosts now, but I love this podcast because, again, it's really focused it's really centered around leadership and entrepreneurship. Obviously, the name EntreLeadership, but they bring in a lot of different guests and speakers to talk about their journey and how they've gotten there on their journey. Again, Ken Coleman was the one that when I really got started listening to him, and he was the host. It's now transitioned to another person. But again, EntreLeadership is the next podcast that I would recommend, especially for small businesses or business leaders out there, entrepreneurs out there that are wanting to grow their business and figure out how they can better themselves. My third favorite podcast that I listened to, and this one actually I got turned on to probably maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and have become an active fan. But it is the Mindset Mentor hosted by Rob Dial. This podcast, Rob Dial, most times he does these shows solo by himself, but he does bring different guests on as well. He had Tony Robbins on his show not too long ago. But Rob really, he's a life coach, business coach, and he really breaks down kind of the why we do the things that we do, but more importantly, how do we get better? So, I mean, everything from how to sleep better, how to be a better speaker, how to get rid of negative thoughts. A lot of people may think that those things kind of sound hokey, but man, some of these things I have practiced. Actually, one of the last podcasts I did, I talked about trading your entertaining yourself for education. That was something that I got from Rob Dial. I mean, he talked about, hey, at the end of your life, are you going to be more consumed on, or more, are you going to talk more about the cat videos you watch, or how much more you're educated by the books you read, the things that you did to educate yourself? So number 3 would be the Mindset Mentor, hosted by Rob Dial. 4th, and again, this one actually I can maybe even move up to my second one because I probably even listen to this one more than any of the other ones. But this one is actually more of a personal one of mine. It's not necessarily a business podcast, but it's been one of my favorites. It's Focus on the Family, hosted by Jim Daly. If you don't know, Focus on the Family, it's a nonprofit organization that centers around biblical truths to help families thrive through Jesus Christ. This one, I started listening to. It was broadcasted on a local station at, I think it was like 5 a.m. I think it maybe still is, every morning. And I would listen to this on my way to the gym. It's a 25-minute podcast where they bring on different guests to talk about all the things that go on in the family, through marriage, through children, through grandparenting, the struggles that we have. They bring on different guests. This broadcast, they actually air 5 episodes a week, Monday through Friday. So you can listen to this one every day. But again, this one I really do listen to because it's really helped me to become a better husband and a better father, a better servant into my community, a better servant to others around me. And it's one that I love listening to. I mean, very rarely do I not listen to it in the morning. So Focus on the Family would be the next podcast that I would recommend. Really love it from a personal standpoint and a spiritual standpoint. Last but not least, he's one of my favorite pastors, turned maybe into a business coach, still a pastor. He leads probably the largest church in America. But the Craig Groeschel Leadership Podcast is another one, favorite of mine that I listen to. Craig Groeschel, if you've never heard of him, man, he just brings it home. We were actually on a trip last week. We were on a business trip going to meet some clients, and we were listening to this one. And man, there's just so many nuggets that he brings out. He brings on different guests through his podcast. He also does a bunch of solo ones, but he really talks about, again, businesses, but how to be a better leader, why we do the things we do, why we hire the people we hire, how do we lead better, how do we manage better. And man, I don't want to go into details on Craig, but like, he's just got a way to really break down things in very simplest forms to make you think just differently about them. And again, it's interesting, like some of the same struggles that you and I have, and he brings them to light and talks about how we can be better. I will say this, I read one of his last books a couple years ago, and like he really got into depth talking about, creating, how we have habits, and or more importantly, how do we create bad habits, but how do we turn those bad habits into good habits? But he's talking about, how your brain is hardwired or has neurons to create these neural pathways. And once that happens over and over, it becomes a habit, whether it's drinking or using tobacco or reading by any means, but and it can be exercising as well. So when you start conditioning yourself over and over, after 5 or 6 times, your brain realizes a pattern and it creates those neural pathways. So he says there's ways to create them, but there's also ways to change them or get rid of them. So this one has really helped me with some of my negative thoughts and habits and helped me replace those with more positive and good habits. So Craig Groeschel would be the next podcast that I would recommend. So just to go through these in order, and again, we'll drop them down in the episode notes so you can actually look at them. Really, really recommend them. I know there are just today, man, everybody is hosting podcasts, and there are hundreds to choose from. So how do you figure out which ones to listen to and which ones you don't? Again, for me, my top 5 are going to be the Business Made Simple podcast, the EntreLeadership podcast, the Mindset Mentor podcast, the Focus on the Family podcast, and the Craig Groeschel Leadership podcast. But I would love to hear from you. If there are other podcasts that you would recommend that you listen to frequently, please let me know. I would be more interested in the educational podcast instead of the entertaining podcast. I don't listen to much entertainment podcasts. I try to listen to more education podcasts, especially during the week with my limited time. So yeah, if you get a chance, if you're watching this from YouTube, drop down in the comments and maybe share with some of the podcasts that you listen to that you think others in our community can benefit from. We would love to hear what those are. So again, that's all I got for you today. Hey, thank you so much for listening to the BulkLoads podcast. I just want to give a shout out, man. I keep hearing more and more positive things from you all, from different listeners, really across the country, that have valued from our podcast. And that means so much to me, taking the time to listen to this podcast. I hope you get a tremendous amount of value in what I shared today, just with kind of what I do in life and specifically the podcasts I listen to. So if you know other people that would be interested in this, please just hit the share button and share this with others in your group that say, hey, man, I think these would be some that you would be interested in as well. We'd greatly appreciate it. So thank you very much. And as always, God bless.